Everybody talks about microphones, better preamps, or the greatest new plugin to finally make a good recording. But the biggest variable for a great recording lies in front of the microphone. Let's take a look at two scenarios to find out how we can take advantage of this mysterious part of our recording chain called room acoustics. Don't believe me that acoustics are important? Listen to this. Sounds pretty normal, right? Now let's get rid of the reverb. Reverb is often a subconscious thing, you only hear it once it's gone. Our brain uses the sound of a room to estimate the dimensions and even the building materials of the room. The most important clues are the reverb time and the timbre. So our ears need to focus on that when we are recording. But reverb also blends instruments together, can help carry phrases, and can even affect the tempo of a performance. So the room changes the music. And recording the room helps the music make sense in the recording. This leads us to our first recording scenario. It's always good to record in a room that sounds really nice. To figure out how the room sounds, we move around and clap and sing, and you can also play your instrument or let the musicians play their instrument. We listen for background noise, which should be as little as possible, the length of the reverb, which should be fitting for the music, and the timbre of the reverb, which should be as even as possible. Ha! Okay, this room doesn't sound too bad, but it could be a little less reverberant for my taste. To understand what we can do to change the acoustics, let's figure out what reverb actually is first. You can hear the piano because the sound moves from the piano to your ear. But the sound also moves in other directions and gets reflected by the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. Because of that, the sound reaches the ears of the listeners as reflections via several paths with different lengths. A longer path requires more time to travel, so these different path lengths result in reflections arriving at different times at the listeners. Based on the time it takes for these reflections to arrive, you get a sense of the space of the room. The bigger the space, the later the early reflections arrive at your ear. These reflections build up over time, when more and more reflections pile on top of each other, that are reflected many more times and can travel several seconds before they finally reach the audience. After some time, the reverb dies down, because with every reflection, part of the energy gets absorbed by the walls and other objects in the room, making the reflections quieter and quieter. This takes longer in bigger rooms, because the wave travels longer between every reflection. So usually bigger rooms like churches have longer decay times than smaller rooms such as bathrooms. How much of the sound wave is absorbed is dependent on the material. A brick wall, for example, reflects most of the sound wave. Porous materials like a couch absorb a lot of energy. This means that the amount and length of reverb is also dependent on the absorbing qualities of the walls and objects in our room. So if I want less reverb, I close the curtains to create absorbing surfaces. Let's try again. Okay, the reverb got a little shorter, but I noticed something else. I can hear a flutter echo. It appears when a sound wave moves back and forth between two walls periodically. These sounds are unwanted for our recording. We can try to mitigate flutter echoes by setting up diffusers that scatter the sound in different directions, by breaking up the regular structures. These can be special acoustic elements, but also a bookshelf might be sufficient. You can also use absorbers to deaden the sound of the flutter echo. We tried to deaden the sound with these chairs and Molton. It's still there, but it sounds much better. Now that I like the sound of the room, I'm placing the instruments and microphones. I like to place them asymmetrical to the walls and axes. This helps to avoid extreme attenuations and boosts of certain frequencies that can happen at the symmetry axes. Also, I decided to place the piano far away from the Flutter echo. If you're not the musician, let the musicians play and move back and forth in front of the ensemble to place the microphone. Listen to the ratio between the direct signal and the reverb, looking for a place where it sounds best. Place your microphone there and do a test recording to evaluate the sound. Finding the right balance can be tricky. If your recording is too roomy, you lose the clarity of the instruments. If it's too direct, it can sound harsh and unbalanced. Let's listen to our final result. I'm happy with that. But what can you do if you don't have the possibility to record in a beautiful concert hall, but have to record in a small room at home? Most of the time you don't really hear a reverb in these rooms, but the room colors the sound of your instrument heavily. Reducing the reverb with absorbent materials like cushions and mattresses will help you get a less colored sound. You can add artificial reverb later for a more concert hall-like sound. Make sure to add a tasteful amount of reverb. If you're not quite sure, stick with a little less reverb than you think is necessary. Let's summarize. Reverb is the addition of many reflections, and the sound of a room tells us a lot about its properties. Reversely, just looking at a room might tell us something about how it sounds. Choosing the fitting room for the music should be the first step. Then we need to listen closely and change the room's acoustics if necessary. Blend the direct signal and the reverb by changing the microphone's distance to the musicians. In a small room, use absorbent materials to achieve a less colored sound. Thank you so much for watching and have fun recording.